that the stones used in building the Great Pyramid came from Torah, and Torah is a 25 miles to the east.
What if everything you were taught about the pyramids was a lie? They told us Pharaoh Khufu built the Great Pyramid with copper tools and 20,000 workers in just 20 years. But what if Graham Hancock told you that's impossible?
I think we're looking, again, at a lost technology. And it was this ancient apocalypse 12,800 years ago that wiped that.
He spent years digging through forbidden history, ancient maps, declassified scans, and suppressed archaeological data. And what he found shocked even the most seasoned researchers. This is proof of who really built the pyramids, and it will leave you stunned. Graham Hancock, the man who refused to stay silent. Graham Hancock is not your typical historian. He's not an Egyptologist, not a tenured professor, and not part of the academic elite. In fact, that's exactly why so many people trust him. A former journalist for The Economist, Hancock made a bold turn in the 1990s. He stopped chasing headlines and started chasing something deeper: lost history. His questions were simple. What if ancient civilizations were far older than we think? What if our history books only tell half the story? And what if the truth has been literally buried beneath centuries of sand, stone, and stubborn academic gatekeeping? For over 3 decades, Hancock has traveled the globe, from the pyramids of Egypt to the jungles of Indonesia, from the sunken ruins off the coast of Japan to the temples of Central America. He's interviewed experts in geology, astronomy, ancient languages, and comparative mythology. His approach is multidisciplinary, weaving together patterns that mainstream academia often ignores. While traditional scholars call this pseudoscience, millions of readers and viewers have come to see Hancock not as a conspiracy theorist, but as a whistleblower of ancient history. Critics call his theories dangerous, misleading, and even anti-intellectual. But millions of people see something else. A man asking the questions no one else would, and doing it with research, footage, and facts. What makes Hancock different isn't just his ideas, but his refusal to stay silent. He doesn't claim to have all the answers. He simply points out that the current story doesn't make sense, that the pieces don't fit, and that there's more to our past than we've been told. And at the top of Hancock's list of misunderstood wonders is the biggest and most baffling monument of all, the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Khufu problem, a monument with no name. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the most iconic structure on Earth. Yet when you look inside it for answers, something strange happens. There are none. According to the official story, it was built around 2500 BCE by Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops. The narrative says it took just over 20 years to complete, using a massive workforce of skilled laborers, not slaves. Around 2.3 million limestone blocks were moved into place with copper tools, wooden sleds, and a lot of manpower. It's a story that's been repeated in textbooks, museums, and classrooms for generations. But Graham Hancock isn't buying it. His simple question is, where's the evidence? For a civilization as detail-obsessed as ancient Egypt, the silence inside the Great Pyramid is deafening. Most royal tombs are overflowing with inscriptions from chapters of the Book of the Dead, praises to the gods, the names of pharaohs, carved declarations of power, and divine lineage. But inside the Great Pyramid, there's nothing. Not a single hieroglyph on the interior walls. No grand reliefs, no dedications, and no funeral texts. Just massive, silent chambers carved in stone. Even the so-called sarcophagus in the king's chamber is questionable. It's a plain granite box that is unmarked, undecorated, and empty. No mummy has ever been found, no burial relics, no royal seals, and nothing to prove that Khufu or anyone else was ever laid to rest there. So, where does the Khufu connection come from? Just one thing: some quarry marks, which are basically ancient graffiti allegedly scrawled on the inside of a hidden chamber above the king's chamber. These marks were supposedly discovered in 1837 by Colonel Howard Vyse, a British explorer working with explosives and primitive tools. According to Vyse's journal, the chamber was sealed until he blasted his way in, and just so happened to find inscriptions naming Khufu. But Hancock and other researchers point out how shaky this claim is. First, Vyse had competition with another explorer who was about to outshine him. Second, there were no witnesses to the discovery of the Khufu graffiti. Third, several inconsistencies in Weiss's records suggest he may have forged the marks to secure fame and funding. To this day, that quarry mark is the only direct evidence linking Khufu to the Great Pyramid. It's not carved in stone on the outside. It's not in any ancient papyrus describing the building process. And it's not in any temple reliefs or royal tombs from the era. So why is this massive monument, which is a marvel of engineering unmatched even by today's standards, officially credited to a king who left no mark on it? Hancock's answer is unsettling. He suggests the pyramid wasn't built for Khufu at all. Instead, Khufu may have found it, inherited it, and then claimed it. Then, later Egyptian dynasties may have restored or reused older structures without fully understanding their origins. It would explain why such an advanced structure stands out so dramatically from the rest of the Old Kingdom's pyramids, most of which are crumbling piles of rubble today. In other words, the pyramid's true origins may have already been a mystery even to the ancient Egyptians themselves. But, even if we accept that Khufu didn't build it, or that he merely inherited it, we're still left with the bigger, harder question. How was it built in the first place? Because what comes next isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a full-blown engineering impossibility. The engineering that shouldn't exist. When you strip away the myths and marvel at the raw mechanics of the Great Pyramid, something becomes disturbingly clear. This was not a primitive construction project. It was a masterclass in precision engineering that modern builders would struggle to replicate even today. Let's start with the basics. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an error margin of just 0.05 degrees. Not magnetic north, but true north, which is a direction only accurately measured today using advanced instruments and satellites. Yet somehow, over 4,500 years ago, this alignment was achieved using tools we are told were made of copper and stone. How? Then there's the base of the pyramid. It covers more than 13 acres, yet it is perfectly level, with a variance of less than an inch across the entire foundation. Even with modern laser-guided surveying equipment, achieving that level of flatness on such a massive scale would be a monumental task. And then, there's the way the stones fit together. The limestone casing stones, many of which were stripped in later centuries, and the inner granite blocks are fitted so precisely that in many cases, you cannot slide a razor blade between them. Some joints are angled, others are curved. They don't just fit tightly, but interlock, absorbing force and weight. This isn't slapdash stacking, but intricate, deliberate stonework. Now think about the tools the official story gives us: copper chisels and dolerite pounding stones. But copper is a soft metal, far too soft to cut granite. Experimental archaeology has tried recreating this process using these tools, but the results were slow, inefficient, and inaccurate. At best, it takes hours to make minimal progress on a single stone. At worst, the tools break down almost immediately. Yet the Great Pyramid contains an estimated 2.3 million blocks, some weighing between 2 and 15 tons. These had to be quarried, shaped, transported, and precisely placed. According to the official timeline, all of this was done in about 20 years. That means setting a block every 2.5 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 2 decades without pause, without error, and with perfect mathematical consistency. Even more baffling is the design of the internal chambers, especially the Grand Gallery and the King's Chamber. The geometry is elegant, deliberate, and full of mathematical significance. The height-to-base ratio of the pyramid approximates pi, and the structure encodes knowledge of the equinoxes, the solar year, and even the curvature of the Earth. This isn't just a tomb, but a scientific instrument built in stone. Graham Hancock puts it simply: this is not primitive trial and error. This is advanced engineering. He argues that the construction quality and architectural intelligence of the Great Pyramid far exceed what we see in later pyramids. In fact, most pyramids built after Khufu's are unstable or collapsing, with some being barely recognizable ruins. So, how could the Egyptians start with near perfection, only to regress? To Hancock, the conclusion is unavoidable. The Great Pyramid was not a product of the Old Kingdom. It was either inherited, repurposed, or built by a civilization with knowledge and tools we no longer understand. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear: The Great Pyramid wasn't just built, but engineered with brilliance that defies its time. But there's another layer to this mystery. Because building it is one thing, but transporting the materials is an entirely different level of impossibility. Where exactly did these enormous stones come from, and how were they moved? The 80-ton puzzle, moving the impossible. If building the pyramid with precision wasn't enough of a mystery, transporting the building materials takes the enigma to a whole new level, especially when you look at the heart of the structure, the king's chamber. Unlike the limestone blocks used for most of the pyramid, the walls and ceiling of the king's chamber were made from granite, a much harder and heavier stone. And not just any granite. These massive blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, were transported from Aswan, a quarry over 500 miles away in southern Egypt. Let that sink in. Each of those blocks weighs about as much as a diesel locomotive. Now imagine moving multiple locomotives upstream along the Nile, then somehow dragging them inland, and finally lifting them over 150 feet high into the core of the pyramid, all using nothing more than ropes, wooden sleds, and muscle power. That is what the official narrative would have you believe. But here's the problem. There is no solid evidence for how this was done. The most common theory is the ramp theory, the idea that workers built massive earthen or spiral ramps to haul the stones up the sides of the growing pyramid. But engineers who've analyzed this theory point out its fatal flaw. The ramp itself would have needed to be as long as a mile and contain more material than the pyramid itself. And yet, no trace of such a ramp has ever been found. Not a single remnant of this supposedly essential engineering structure has survived. Others propose internal spiral ramps or pulleys, but again, there's no archaeological evidence to support these ideas. And the tools said to be used, like wooden sleds, copper chisels, and ropes, fall apart under scrutiny when applied to such incredible weights. Modern crane operators and stoneworkers have even attempted to move and shape granite blocks using replicas of ancient tools, and found it extremely difficult and inefficient, even with today's techniques. In fact, many modern engineers have gone on record saying they could not replicate the construction of the Great Pyramid with the tools attributed to ancient Egyptians. Graham Hancock puts it bluntly. This wasn't manpower, this was know-how. He suggests that the builders possessed a level of engineering knowledge that has been lost or deliberately ignored. Whether it involved advanced lifting systems or an understanding of physics we no longer possess, it's clear the official story leaves us with more questions than answers. And then there's the biggest question of all. If this wasn't done in 2500 BCE, as mainstream Egyptology claims, then when was it done? Hancock believes the answer isn't carved into the walls or hidden in burial chambers. It's found somewhere else entirely, not in stone, but in water. To uncover the real timeline of the pyramids, Hancock turns to something most archaeologists have ignored: the rain-worn stone of the Sphinx. And what it reveals might push our understanding of Egyptian history back thousands of years. The Sphinx and the water. At the edge of the Giza Plateau stands one of the most iconic monuments in human history, the Great Sphinx. Half lion, half human, carved from a single mass of limestone, it stares silently across the desert sands. According to mainstream Egyptologists, it was built around 2500 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. But Hancock says that the timeline is wrong, and correcting it would tell who really built the pyramids. This is the question that geologist Dr. Robert Schoch dared to ask. In the 1990s, Schoch examined the Sphinx not as an artifact, but as a geological formation. What he found sent shockwaves through the academic world. The stone surrounding the Sphinx shows deep vertical fissures, a type of erosion pattern caused not by wind and sand, as the traditional theory suggests, but by heavy, sustained rainfall. This type of water erosion could only have occurred during a period of significant and prolonged precipitation, something Egypt hasn't experienced for thousands of years. The last time the Giza region saw enough rain to cause this kind of weathering was during the late Pleistocene era, around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. In other words, as far back as 10,500 BCE. Schoch's theory instantly clashed with conventional history. If the Sphinx was truly carved that early, it would predate not only the pyramids but the entire dynastic period of Egypt. That would mean there was already a highly capable, organized civilization in place long before we've been taught to believe civilization even existed. Graham Hancock took Shouk's findings and connected them to something even larger: the theory of a global cataclysm, possibly a flood or rapid climate event around 10,500 BCE. This ties into the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a proposed comet strike or massive meltwater event that rapidly ended the last ice age and devastated early cultures around the world. If the Sphinx was carved by a pre-dynastic civilization before this catastrophe, it could be one of the few surviving monuments from a lost chapter of human history, a time when ancient engineers left behind a message in stone. Mainstream historians dismissed this idea as fringe, but they struggled to refute the physical geology standing right in front of them. Wind erosion and sandblasting cannot explain the patterns. Only water can. Hancock concluded that the Sphinx was not created in 2500 BCE. It was merely adopted by the pharaohs, just like the pyramids, from a much older culture. And just as the Sphinx was built in 10,500 BCE, it could not be just coincidence that the stars above that era align perfectly with the monuments below. Hancock believed that whoever built Giza was also mapping the sky, and he pointed to Orion to prove it. A message in the stars. The date is no accident. Before Hancock revealed who really built the pyramids, he asked, what if the pyramids of Egypt weren't just tombs or monuments, but part of a much larger message? One not written in ink or carved into walls, but traced across the stars. This is the core of Robert Bauval's Orion correlation theory, a groundbreaking idea that reshaped how we look at the Giza Plateau. Bauval noticed something strange. The three pyramids of Giza are not perfectly aligned in a straight row. Instead, the third and smallest pyramid is slightly offset. This odd layout, long dismissed as a construction quirk, actually mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt in the night sky. But it goes deeper. Bauval used astronomical software to calculate when Orion's belt would have appeared in this exact configuration directly over Giza. The result was around 10,500 BCE. That date aligns almost perfectly with the Sphinx water erosion findings from Dr. Robert Schoch. Two different lines of evidence from geology and astronomy point to the same distant time. To Graham Hancock, this cannot be coincidence. He argues that the Giza Plateau was designed not just as a ceremonial site, but as a celestial blueprint. This theory gains even more weight when you realize other ancient sites around the world also reflect star maps. From Göbekli Tepe in Turkey to Teotihuacan in Mexico, sacred monuments appear to align with constellations. It suggests a shared global knowledge, far older and more advanced than we ever imagined. As Hancock puts it, these are sky maps, locked in stone, messages left for us by survivors of a global cataclysm. People who knew the stars, understood geometry, and wanted to be remembered not by books, but by aligning the earth with the heavens. So now the question isn't when the pyramids were built. It's who had the knowledge and power to build them so perfectly, so purposefully, thousands of years before recorded civilization. And Hancock says he found the answer. The Ghost Builders. Traces of a Lost Civilization. This is where Graham Hancock delivers the gut punch and says what mainstream historians won't. The pyramids were not built by Pharaoh Khufu or any pharaoh. They were built by someone else, long before dynastic Egypt even existed. According to Hancock, the true builders were survivors of an advanced pre-Ice Age civilization, wiped out around 12,800 years ago by a global cataclysm, possibly a comet impact during the Younger Dryas period. These weren't cavemen. They were master architects, astronomers, and navigators. They were a forgotten people Hancock calls the magicians of the gods. He believes that when this civilization collapsed, its survivors carried fragments of their knowledge across the globe, planting the seeds of later ancient cultures. And the Great Pyramid was one of their most important legacies. Not a tomb or a monument to ego, but a time capsule, a stone message designed to outlast floods, wars, and memory itself. And here's where it gets eerie. Hancock shows that pyramid structures and cosmic alignments appear across continents, from the Sun Pyramid in Teotihuacan, Mexico, to Angkor Wat in Cambodia, to the pyramids of Meroe in Sudan, all built by people who supposedly had no contact. Yet all share similar mathematical constants, celestial alignments, and even architectural features. He connects these dots by saying that they were looking at fingerprints, the same hand, the same knowledge, echoing through time. To Hancock, the builders of the Giza pyramids knew sacred geometry, measured the Earth's dimensions, and encoded precession of the equinoxes into stone. Knowledge we only began to understand in recent centuries. And here's the final claim that stunned the world. Hancock wasn't guessing. He brought the proof. Through geology, astronomy, architectural analysis, and global pattern recognition, he built a case that points directly to a real lost civilization, older, smarter, and far more capable than anything in our textbooks. This is who really built the pyramids. But if that's true, and if history is wrong on this scale, why haven't we been told? Hancock says the answer is simple. Because some people are working very hard to keep the truth buried. The cover-up. For Graham Hancock, the most infuriating part of this entire mystery isn't just the gaps in the story, but the way those gaps have been actively covered up. He points to a moment in 1993 that changed everything. German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a robot named Upuaut 2 into the narrow shafts of the Great Pyramid. What it found stunned the world, a sealed door deep inside the pyramid leading to where no one knew. But instead of excitement and further exploration, Gantenbrink was shut out. The Egyptian authorities, under the then Antiquities Director Zahi Hawass, took over and blocked his access. To this day, the mystery of that door remains unresolved. Why stop investigating something so important? Hancock believes it was intentional censorship. Fast forward to 2017. Scientists used muon tomography, an advanced particle scanning technique, to peek inside the pyramid. What they discovered was even more astonishing. A massive hidden void above the Grand Gallery. A space so large it could house a passenger jet. But again, no cameras have gone in, and no updates or excavations have been made. Just silence. Frustrated by this pattern of concealment, Hancock finally spoke out, saying, "I can't stay silent anymore." He believes these discoveries are being deliberately withheld from the public, not because they pose a danger, but because they pose a threat. If the pyramids weren't built by the dynastic Egyptians, then the entire timeline of history would have to be rewritten. Academic careers, global institutions, even national pride are rooted in the current version of events. Challenging that narrative isn't just inconvenient, it's explosive. So instead of open inquiry, we get gatekeeping. Instead of answers, we get excuses. Hancock isn't claiming to have all the answers. What he's saying is even more powerful. We owe it to the past and to the future to ask better questions. For Hancock, this isn't just a historical cover-up, but an existential one. He believes the pyramids are not tombs, but messages and deliberate signals from a lost civilization. And that message has been buried not just in sand and stone, but under centuries of denial. If he's right, then we're not the first advanced civilization to walk this earth. And maybe we're not as special as we thought. What do you think about Hancock's proof? Tell us in the comments below. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.